to Jesus as an example. Because, again, if I call myself a Christian, what does Christian mean?
Christ.
Little Christ, right? One who follows Christ.
Palm pepper spray is next generation OC spray. It's hot at 1.4% major capsaicinoids, and its modular design means you can customize it exactly to you. 3 different setups, lots of different color combinations. You can make it exactly as you like. And the flip top safety prevents accidental discharges. It's 10 to 12 foot range and 25 half-second blasts. Make sure that you can keep that long range eye poke at long range. I trust Palm OC and I recommend it for everyone for self-defense.
Christ is the Greek term for Messiah, right? I always say, listen, I generally, so Christ is a title, not his last name. Okay? Jesus the Christ, Jesus the Messiah. I call him King Jesus. I follow the King, the great King, the King of Kings. And my King Jesus, has a kingdom. And I'm here as his ambassador. It's pretty cool. I get to be his ambassador. Anybody ever thought about ambassadorships in the United States? Remember when we were in Rwanda, we got to meet the United States ambassador to Rwanda. It's a pretty cool job. You show up, I'm not Rwandan, but I understand Rwandan culture very well. I can swim in Rwandan culture very well. I speak your language. I participate in your rituals, but I'm here as a representative of the United States. And I'm here to be the United States in your land. Okay, I serve the King of Kings, and I'm an ambassador of King Jesus. I know your world, I speak your language, I can participate in your rituals, I appreciate you, and I'm here to benefit you on behalf of my King. And to represent him to you. And I want to do a good job of representing him to you. So, did Jesus use violence? Occasionally. This is one that people are like, well, Jesus was non-violent. I go, okay, let's go to John chapter 2. If you go to John chapter 2, verses 13 to 17, is Jesus cleansing the temple.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it just shows up out of the blue in John chapter 2. He's at the wedding in Cana, and then he decides, wait, I'm going to go to Passover in Jerusalem. He apparently did that multiple times, because the only time in the Synoptic Gospels we see him do it is at the end of his life. But he apparently did it a whole bunch. And it says he sees the money changers and all that stuff, so you don't understand the temple world. So the original temple, by the design that was given to David and built by Solomon, is a single courtyard with the basin out front. People would bring their offering there. They would slaughter the offering there and offer it on the altar. Okay, fine. When they rebuilt and built Herod's temple, which is one of the seven ancient wonders of the world, they built it with multiple courtyards. So you had that inner courtyard that only the priests were allowed to go in, where they did the sacrifices. Then outside of that, they had a court they called the Court of Israel. And the Court of Israel, well, they had the Court of the Levites, then the Holy of Holies on the inside of that. So then the Court of the Levites is where only the priests and the Levites could go. Then the Court of Israel, where only Jewish men who were above the age of 13, had been through their bar mitzvah, could go. And then the Court of Women, where women and children could go as long as they were Jewish and were observant. Then outside of that, the Court of the Gentiles. None of that trash is in anything that David was given to build the stupid temple. None of that's in any of the description of the tabernacle. Okay? They just added on to things. It's a very Jewish way to do things. And so then what would happen is that when people wanted to come to do a Passover offering that they were commanded to do by God, so then they bring animals to offer as an offering. But of course, they're coming from a long way off. What's the chances that their animals are going to get injured or sick or not be acceptable by the standard of the temple when it shows up? Non-zero. So then eventually, I think somebody that's well-meaning might be like, hey, I have an extra sheep. And I tell you what, I'll swap your sheep for my sheep, but my sheep's a little better than your sheep, so we've got to figure out something. Maybe you add a chicken. Not like that. Okay? Or maybe you add some coins or whatever. Well, eventually it's like, okay, well, gosh, man, instead of having to go out into the countryside and find that guy, what if hey, I'll be the guy that like if you've got a really good sheep that'll make it, why don't you give him to me, and I'll hang out just outside the temple in town and be the place to like hang out like Bob's sacrificial sheep. Well, then eventually it got easy enough to like we'll just put it in the outer courtyard so that when they show up, they don't have to go find us from there. Well, then, Rome, then they had their own money system. But of course, starting in the time of Julius Caesar called himself a god. He put his face on the coin. Now that coin has got the face of a foreign god on it. Is it okay to put that in the temple treasury? Well, the Jewish people, man, I don't like that because that feels like idolatry. So maybe we should have our own kind of coinage for that. And then let people exchange that. But of course, that's a full-time job. And in order to do that full-time job, eventually that guy's got to be able to make a little money, so we'll have an exchange rate. The funny part for that to me is, guess what? You hand me a denarius, I hand you a temple coin. You go inside the temple, you put that temple coin in the box. Guess what they did with that temple coin? brought it right back to this guy and exchanged it for denarii to go take out into town to buy things. Do you think God didn't notice that? Like, ooh, look, sleight of hand. No idolatry here, Lord.
Yeah.
Okay? So not doing okay. But so Jesus sees all that, and eventually it's just a business. Right? I don't give a crap about any stuff. I don't have any heart for you. You got to come and do that. And Jesus is like, ain't happening. So what does he do?
Fashions a whip.
He makes a whip, a big whip of cords, right? Which is a flail is what we would call that today.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's like, you're out of here. Now the funny part to me is people think like Jesus is all proper. You have made my father's house into a den of thieves. But this was made to be a house of prayer. And they all went, man, you're right, and left. And like, man, that was kind of, he like took some time to like really think about it and make this whip, and like that was cool. And like, what was he, like Indiana Jones or something like that? What happened here? No, that was a threat of violence. At the very least, a threat of violence. It says he turned the money changer's table over. I think he went up there and goes, hey man, do you mind if I, no, he's like, dude, get this trash out of here. That was using force. What was the whip for? Like, well, he just used that to drive the animals. Bull crap, don't give me that. Do you think all the people were going to be like, well, I mean, the rabbi that nobody knows decided to drive all the animals out of here. I guess we ought to let him. You think nobody else went, hey man, stop that. And he's like, your choice, buddy. I'm driving them out. You want a piece? Well, what's your authority to do that? Right here.
Right.
So did Jesus ever use force? I think you can't see cleansing the temple as anything other than a use of force. I just don't think there's a way around to see that as Jesus, at the very least, threatening force against these guys. Now, you might go, well, wait a minute. That seems like an unjust use of force then, because, they weren't a threat to him. Technically speaking, they're trespassing in his house.
That's true.
That's his house. He's God himself, and they're trespassing. Remember, if you were here in my realistic de-escalation class yesterday, we talked about a dude trespassing people and said, hey, get out of my store, and they were like, no, and he OC sprayed the guy. That's actually ended up being a justified use of force, because after you've made a trespassing notice, you can use reasonable force to actually enforce that trespassing on your own property. Now, there would be some argument from the other people that it wasn't his place, but they were wrong about that. Okay? So, did he ever use violence? But not always. John 18 is the arrest of Jesus. Now, first of all, Jesus was a laborer, and we know that he was big enough and capable enough to scare enough people to cleanse a temple. Do you think that a mob of morons with pitchforks and torches was really a bigger deal to him? Remember, he's the King of Kings and the head of an army of angels. Can you just imagine Gabriel, and not Gabriel necessarily, he's a lover, not a fighter, but the angel Michael, the protector of Israel? Could you imagine Michael and his angel army just standing by, like whispering in Jesus' ears, please, Jesus, please, just give me the word. Please, Jesus, let me chop these guys up into little bitty pieces. Please, I'll make it fast. Please. And Jesus is like, shut up, go away. I'm doing my mission here. Jesus knew his mission, but so he didn't use force to defend himself there, though he absolutely could have at any given time. God himself could squash those guys like bugs, okay? But he chose not to. There's important parts there, and we have to recognize that as such. Now, I believe that in that spot, and we can see that in Jesus' entire coming up to that, he's talked repeatedly about, I have to fulfill my mission. And I know what my mission is, and I'm going to walk my mission out voluntarily. So that's not to say he couldn't have done that, but he chose that path himself to walk that mission. Okay, fine. His message was certainly towards being merciful and peaceful. You go look in the Sermon on the Mount. I think the Sermon on the Mount should be absolutely central to the life of a follower of the way of Jesus today. That's Jesus talking about, here are the values of my kingdom. Here are the values of the King of Kings. And the Sermon on the Mount is the center of it, right? It's some of the most beautiful prose that's ever been written down. Incredible value there for us as followers of Jesus towards being blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Should we be merciful people? Yes. If we want to be like our King, like I say, Jesus' mercy is way bigger than we give him credit for, way more scandalous than we give him credit for, and I want my character to be like his, so I have to be merciful. And his general, certainly his general bent is towards being non-retaliatory. So when I talk about self-defense, I always say I use a gun as a shield and not a sword. To protect and not to punish. Not to retaliate for wrongdoing, but to stop somebody from wrongdoing against me. I'll tell you a story about this. This is a real story from my family. My grandfather did 3.5 years for attempted murder when I was a kid, okay? 10 years old, he went to jail for 3.5 years. Some guy, and okay, there's got to be some story background here, but everybody who really knows the story is dead, so I'll never get the full story. But for some reason that I'm not sure of, some dude showed up to my grandparents' house when my grandpa was gone one day and stuck a gun in my grandma's face. And when she didn't have whatever it was he wanted, he pistol whipped her twice. Beat her up pretty good, put her in the hospital, broke her finger with her wedding ring on it. She had to have her wedding ring cut off. Had a big scar, not a big scar, but a big bruise on her face. Beat shit out of her. My grandpa was a weird guy. He had a weird moral code. I loved him to pieces, but he was raised as a foster child, and so his first real home was in the Marine Corps, and he had a, shall we say, interesting connection to the law, okay? He was a prohibited possessor when I was a teenager. We had guns all over the place. He gave 2 craps about that, maybe where I got it. And so was Grandpa involved in some shady crap? If you heard this thing, some dude just showed up at random at Grandma's house and stuck a gun in her face and pistol whipped her when something didn't go right, does that sound like an encounter that happens much? No, I just don't know what the problem was. Okay? Is it possible one of my grandpa's shithead friends, and he had a lot of shithead friends, he was like financing bad juju, whether that's a stolen car ring or something like that? I could see him doing something crazy like that. Okay? I don't think drugs. I don't think he'd get involved in drugs, but maybe, some other shady crap. Anyways, Grandpa figured out who did it. 2 days later, found that guy in a bar. My grandfather would never go in a bar. He was drunk one time in his life. It was the day I was born. He had a grandson. He went and got drunk. Okay? Then he got all pissed off when I changed my last name when I was 8, when my stepdad adopted me. Found out who did it. 2 days later, went into a bar, which he'd never go into, and shot that dude right between the eyes with a .357 Magnum. Dude started pulling away right at the last second. Grandpa pulled a gun and shot him. Dude started pulling away, so it hit him here and scalped him. It did 72 stitches around his head. Didn't penetrate that guy's skull. I was like, dude, a .357 didn't penetrate that guy's skull? Holy crap, you want to talk about the luckiest day of that man's life. So Grandpa was convicted of attempted murder, because he said, yeah, I wanted to kill that guy. And sentenced to 6 years in California State Pen, and did 3.5, okay? Most minimum security prison I've ever seen in my life. All the guards were like, yeah, we did fucking shot that guy too. They all understood. He was in prison in California State, and he had keys to his own truck, and drove between different prisons building buildings for them. He was a brick mason and a contractor. So he literally, his prison had, the fences were this high. It was like Club Fed. I mean, with really crappy food and a really shitty curfew, and a bunch of bad dudes. But he drove between places and all that stuff. Anyways, wasn't that, but why did he get convicted? Because he used force retaliatory. If he was there and shot the guy while the guy's threatening my grandma, well, that's defensive, right? Nah, you found out a couple days later. No, that's punishment. That's the state's job, not yours. Okay, so we got to watch out for that stuff. And I think our aim is to be like him in every way possible to the maximum extent possible. So if I want to be like my king, occasionally, for the right reasons and in the right way, using the right amount of force can be okay. However, not always. I have to live out my mission too, and part of my mission is loving people and valuing the image of God in them, and I should seek to minimize the use of force to every extent possible. Because, like his message, I have to have a bent towards mercy, a bent towards peacefulness, and a bent towards not retaliating and not defending my ego, if I want to be like Jesus. One of the things I love is that Jesus knew who he was, and he didn't need nobody else to like him. Like, hey, you want to go? Herod wants to meet you, and he's like, nah, I'm good. Nah, don't need fame. Don't need that guy. The other funny part to me is we get it wrapped around the axle about politics. How interested was Jesus politically in his world? I mean, politics were a big deal in his world. Does Rome belong here? There, this, that, should we be independent or not? And Jesus is like, nah, whatever. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's and God's what's God's. Like, I don't want to get involved in it. And he had dudes who were zealots, who were political zealots and tax collectors in his inner tribe. Could you imagine how that goes? Like Simon the Zealot, a zelotes is like, makes a hardcore Trumper look like a liberal. Okay? And like that, and a tax collector. And you're like, okay. How are these guys getting along? We look at each other across the table, what's up, bro? Let's not talk about that stuff, okay? All right, sounds good. So I just want to be like him in every way I possibly can, right? And I think that's really important for us to do that.